Montana, 1926. The winter sun hung low over the Bitterroot Valley, casting long shadows across the porch of the old sheriff's house. Ben Cartwright sat in his rocking chair, 82 years old now, his hands weathered like the leather of an ancient saddle. The journalist from Helena had driven 3 hours to hear the story, and Cartwright was in no hurry to tell it. "You want to know about the Great Freeze?" The old man's voice carried the gravel of 5 decades smoking hand-rolled cigarettes. "About how Copper Ridge survived when 12 other towns died. I'll tell you about a woman who understood dirt better than most men understood whiskey." The journalist leaned forward, pencil ready. Cartwright closed his eyes and the years fell away. December 1885. Temperature 45 degrees below zero. Wind howling at 70 miles per hour, carrying snow like frozen razors across the Montana high country. Buildings collapsing under the weight of ice, families freezing in their beds. The town of Copper Ridge dying 1 degree at a time, but 30 feet below the surface in a chamber carved from limestone and clay. Margaret Thorne sat reading her dead father's engineering journal by the light of a single candle. The thermometer mounted on her whitewashed wall read 54 degrees. No fire, no stove, just the earth itself holding the memory of summer while winter screamed above. Someone was hammering on the iron hatch. Desperate, dying. Maggie didn't rush. She checked the thermometer one more time, confirmed the ventilation pipes were clear, then stood. Climbed the ladder, through the bolts, opened the door between two worlds. "That's where the story really starts," Cartwright said, opening his eyes. "But you need to go back 6 months to understand why she was down there in the first place." August 15th, 1885. Heat shimmering off the Montana plains like the air itself was burning. Maggie stood at the edge of the dry well, holding a piece of paper that felt heavier than the empty bucket at her feet. Notice of intent to reclaim signed by the county clerk, but authored by Silas Blackwood, the territory's most successful land speculator. The document was simple. By November 15th, any parcel within the Copper Ridge boundary not featuring a permanent habitable structure would revert to public trust for auction. 3 months to build a house or lose everything. Blackwood sat on his horse 10 yards away, boots polished to a shine that seemed an insult to the cracked earth. He didn't dismount, didn't need to. The paper did the work. "Your husband's debts don't disappear with him, Mrs. Thorne." His voice was flat factual. 3 months. Build something permanent, or I buy this land at auction for pennies. Maggie looked at the well, 30 feet deep, 4 feet across, bone dry since the drought of 1882. To everyone in Copper Ridge, it was a scar on worthless land. To Blackwood, it was a legal technicality waiting to be exploited. "A hole in the ground is not a farm," he said. "See you November 15th. He turned his horse and rode back toward town, trailing dust. Maggie didn't cry. She calculated. $3.47 in the coffee tin, 1 aging mule, a collection of rusted tools her husband Jack had left behind when the mine shaft collapsed 8 months ago. Lumber for even the smallest cabin would cost $80, a mason's labor another $50. The mathematics of survival were brutal and clear, but she had the well. She had the one thing Blackwood considered worthless. The law required a permanent habitable structure. It didn't specify direction. That afternoon, Sheriff Ben Cartwright rode out to check on the widow. Official capacity welfare visit, the kind of thing a lawman did in small towns where everyone knew everyone's business. He found Maggie kneeling at the well's edge, dropping a stone into the darkness. She counted under her breath, 1, 2, 2.1 seconds. "Blackwood served you?" Cartwright asked, dismounting. "He did. You got $3 to your name in a dry hole." The sheriff tried to soften it, but facts were facts. "No offense, but what's your plan?" Maggie looked up at him, her face sun dark and unreadable. "The hole." Cartwright blinked. "Ma'am, the plan is the hole, Sheriff." She turned back to her measurements, rope in hand, marking depths with knots. Cartwright stood there another minute, waiting for elaboration that never came, then climbed back on his horse. 40 years later, sitting on that porch in 1926, Cartwright shook his head at the memory. "I thought grief had finally broken her," he told the journalist. "I was wrong. She was the sanest person in the territory." That night, Maggie sat in her tent with a leather-bound journal that smelled of old paper and engine grease. Her father, William Marsh, had been a drainage engineer for the Northern Pacific Railroad. He died when she was 17, crushed between two freight cars during a coupling accident, but he'd left behind this ledger. Pages of diagrams, calculations, the accumulated knowledge of a man who understood that water and air and heat all followed rules, and those rules could be bent to human purpose. She turned to a page marked geothermal gradients. Her father's handwriting, neat and precise. Ground temperature at 12 feet depth equals 55 degrees Fahrenheit, constant, summer or winter. Thermal mass coefficient for clay soil equals 2.1 BTU per pound per degree Fahrenheit. The Earth is an infinite heat battery. Use it. Maggie did the math. Cabin construction $130 minimum. Available funds $3.47. Deficit impossible. Alternative calculation. Excavate existing well from 4-foot diameter to 10-foot diameter. Depth already achieved 30 feet. Cost labor only. Her labor. Free. She sketched quickly. A chamber 10 feet across. 7-foot ceiling. Dry stacked stone walls. Ventilation pipes using Bernoulli's principle. A hatch at ground level. The law said permanent habitable structure. It never said the structure had to reach toward the sky. For the first week of September, Maggie became a scavenger. The abandoned copper mining camp 5 miles north had been shut down for 2 years, equipment left to rust where it fell. She walked there in the pre-dawn hours, pulling a handcart that squeaked with each rotation of its wooden wheels. The mining camp was a graveyard of failed ambitions, collapsed sluices, broken handcarts, rusted tools scattered like bones. But Maggie wasn't looking for copper. She was looking for iron. Structural iron. Anything that could be repurposed into something permanent. She found 2 stovepipes crushed at the ends but salvageable. A sheet of corrugated iron 8 feet by 4 feet, oxidized but solid. 30 feet of chain, a double pulley system still attached to a rotted timber frame. Tom Brennan watched her from the ridge. 19 years old, hired muscle for Silas Blackwood, he'd been sent to monitor the widow's progress. He rode down as she was loading the second stovepipe onto her cart. Planning to breathe through a straw, Mrs. Thorne, Maggie didn't look up from her knot tying. Air is free, Mr. Brennan. Save yours for the ride back. Brennan laughed, but the laugh had an edge to it. He'd expected tears, expected begging. This woman's sun-dark and silent, tying scrap metal to a cart with hands that didn't shake, unsettled him in ways he couldn't articulate. He rode back to town and reported to Blackwood. She's collecting scrap iron. Blackwood smiled. Let her. She'll bury herself and save me the trouble of eviction. Day 4, Cartwright rode past the Thorne property and saw something that stopped him cold. Maggie had assembled a tripod hoist over the well mouth. 3 timber legs lashed together at the top, a pulley system hanging from the apex. Professional grade rigging. Railroad grade. She was tying a rope around her waist. Ma'am. Cartwright dismounted fast. That's a grave, not a house. Maggie tested the rope's tension, then looked at him. Ground temp down here is 62 degrees, Sheriff. Surface is 94. You tell me which makes more sense. Before he could argue, she stepped over the edge and descended. Hand over hand, boots finding purchase on the limestone walls, she dropped into darkness. Cartwright stood at the edge looking down. He could see nothing but black. Mrs. Thorne, come down if you want to understand. Against every instinct, Cartwright climbed down. The descent took 2 minutes. His boots touched clay at the bottom and the world changed. The heat vanished. The air was cool, dry, still. He could breathe without feeling like his lungs were being baked from the inside. Maggie was standing in a shaft barely wider than her shoulders, but her face was calm. She put her palm flat against the wall. Touch it. Cartwright did. The limestone was cool, solid, no moisture, no give. Frost line goes 5 feet down, Maggie said. This is 30. The earth at this depth doesn't care what the air above is doing. Physics doesn't care about opinions. Cartwright felt the wall, felt the truth of it. She wasn't building a shelter from the weather. She was building a shelter in a different weather entirely. You're serious, he said. I don't have money for jokes, Sheriff. That night back in his office, Cartwright wrote in his daily log, August 18th, 1885. Visited Thorne property. Subject appears mentally sound. Engineering knowledge substantial. Probability of success unknown. 40 years later, he would add a note in the margin. I stopped seeing a widow that day. Started seeing an engineer. Week 2. Maggie began digging. The work was brutal in its simplicity. A 6-foot pickaxe shortened to 4 feet for the confined space. Strike the clay, loosen it, scoop it into a bucket, climb the 30-foot ladder. Haul the bucket up using the pulley system. Dump the clay, descend, repeat. 3-to-1 mechanical advantage on the pulley meant she could lift 100 pounds of earth by pulling with 35 pounds of force. Physics making the impossible merely difficult. She worked 8 hours a day, 14 buckets per hour, 630 pounds of clay extracted daily. The target was clear to expand the 4-foot diameter shaft into a 10-foot diameter chamber. 942 cubic feet of earth to remove. At current rate, 150 days of work. She didn't have 150 days. She had 90. Day 10. The rope frayed and a bucket fell. 45 pounds of wet clay tumbling down the shaft. Maggie pressed herself against the wall as it passed, missing her head by inches. The bucket hit the bottom and shattered. She climbed up, replaced the rope with chain, resumed digging. Day 15. The ladder foot slipped in loose clay. Maggie fell 8 feet before catching herself on a stone protrusion. Her shoulder dislocated. She hung there in the dark, breathing through the pain, then braced her feet and slammed her shoulder against the wall. The joint popped back into socket with a sound like a branch breaking. She resumed digging. Day 20. Her hands wrapped in canvas torn from the tent were blistered through the cloth. Infection set in. Red lines crawling up her forearms. Fever at night. She made a poultice from yarrow and clay, wrapped it tight, and kept working. The town of Copper Ridge watched the dirt mound grow next to the well. Gray clay. Tons of it. The pile grew daily, and with it grew the whispers. Badger Woman, they called her. The mole, the widow who dug her own grave. Week 5, September 20th. Silas Blackwood rode out to the property with Tom Brennan. The dirt mound was now 15 feet high and twice that in diameter. The well mouth bristled with timber and iron. Maggie was emerging from the shaft, her clothes the same color as the earth she'd been excavating. Blackwood didn't dismount. This is insanity. The county won't recognize a pit as a dwelling. Maggie pulled the bucket up, hand over hand on the chain, and dumped it. Clay spilled across the mound like a slow gray river. Law says permanent habitable structure, she said, not looking at him. Doesn't specify above or below grade. You're wasting time. Sell now. I'll give you $50 for the land. Otherwise, you get nothing at auction. I'll see you November 15th, Mr. Blackwood. Now she looked at him. Bring the deed. Blackwood's jaw tightened. She wouldn't argue, wouldn't beg, wouldn't give him the satisfaction of emotional response. Just mathematics in stone, in the steady rhythm of extraction. He turned to Brennan as they rode away. Watch her. If she makes real progress, we stop it. Week 6, the chamber was taking shape. Maggie had excavated downward and outward, creating a dome at the bottom of the shaft. 10 feet in diameter now, 7 feet of headroom. The walls were raw clay and limestone, smooth from her careful work with the shortened pick. She began building the retaining wall. Fieldstone salvaged from 3 abandoned homesteads she'd walked to over the course of a week. Each stone weighed between 10 and 30 pounds. She carried them one at a time, loaded them into her cart, hauled them back. The technique was ancient. Dry stack masonry, no mortar. Each stone placed with a 5-degree outward tilt. The weight of the earth itself would lock them together, creating a compression arch that would hold for decades. She worked from the bottom up. 8 feet of wall, 18 inches thick at the base, tapering to 12 inches at the top. Each stone tested for fit, adjusted, locked into place. September 28th, night. Tom Brennan crept to the well mouth and kicked 40 stones down into the chamber. The crash echoed in the shaft like thunder. He rode away satisfied. Morning. Maggie descended and found the destruction. 40 stones carefully placed over 2 days now scattered across the chamber floor. She looked at them for a full minute. Then she carried them up, one by one, repositioned them, reset them. That afternoon, she strung tripwire bells around the perimeter of her property. October 2nd, night. The bells rang. Maggie emerged from her tent with Jack's old shotgun fired once into the air. Tom Brennan, halfway to the well mouth, ran for his horse. Next morning, Cartwright rode out. You want to press charges? No time for courts, Maggie said. Just tell Blackwood that if his man comes back, I shoot lower. Cartwright tried not to smile. Yes, ma'am. Week 9, October 10th through 15th. The ventilation system. This was the engineering that would determine survival. Maggie dug 2 trenches. The first ran 30 feet from the well, mouth buried 6 feet deep, angling downward. At the end, she installed one of the salvage stovepipes vertical, creating an intake vent. Incoming air would travel through 30 feet of buried pipe, warming from surface temperature to ground temperature before entering the chamber. 55 degrees. Constant. The second pipe she installed vertically at the well mouth. Exhaust. Wind passing over the top would create low pressure via the Venturi effect, sucking stale air from the chamber. Natural circulation, no fans, no fuel, just atmospheric physics. She built a baffle plate suspended 4 inches below the shaft opening. Rain and snow would hit it and drain away. The draft would be maintained. Doc Harrison, making his rounds, stopped to watch her work. He was 55, educated in Chicago, the only man in Copper Ridge with formal medical training. He studied the pipe arrangement for 10 minutes before speaking. Where'd you learn this? Father worked railroad drainage, same principles, air-water pressure? Harrison nodded slowly. To Cartwright later over whiskey at the saloon, he said it plain, she's built a goddamn thermal machine. November 14th, the day before the deadline. Maggie worked through the night applying the final touches. Clay mixed with straw and lime plastered over the interior walls. Not for beauty, for airtight integrity. Every crack sealed, every gap filled. The hatch sheet fabricated from the corrugated iron sheet doubled over with dried grass packed between the layers. 4 heavy bolts. When closed, the seal was absolute. No drafts, no sound. The outside world ceased to exist. She tested it, descended into the chamber, pulled the hatch shut from inside, bolted it. Silence. Perfect silence. The candle flame didn't even flicker. She opened her eyes in darkness that was not quite complete. Thin lines of light around the hatch edges. The thermometer barely visible, 54 degrees. She climbed out. Tomorrow Blackwood would come with the county assessor and the sheriff. Tomorrow she would show them what the law had never anticipated. November 15th. Morning broke cold and clear. 40 degrees. First frost had hit 2 weeks prior and the grass crunched underfoot. Silas Blackwood arrived at 9 o'clock with an entourage. Sheriff Cartwright, County Assessor Miles Freeman, Tom Brennan carrying a ledger and wearing his best attempt at professional dress. They stood at the edge of the Thorne property and saw exactly what Blackwood had expected. Barren land, a massive mound of excavated clay. 2 iron pipes sticking up at odd angles like the ears of some buried machine. No house, no cabin, no structure visible above ground. Blackwood's smile was thin and satisfied. Where's the house, Mrs. Thorne? Maggie walked to what appeared to be flat ground, knelt, brushed away a layer of loose dirt revealing iron. A hatch, flush with the earth. 4 bolt handles. She threw the bolts. 1, Tom. 2, 3, 4, each one clanging with the weight of serious metalwork. She heaved the hatch open. A plume of warm air rose from the opening, visible in the cold morning, carrying the scent of dry earth and limestone and lime plaster. Blackwood stared. A cellar is not a dwelling. Come down and measure the square footage, Mr. Blackwood. Cartwright descended first, legal witness. He expected a damp hole, a desperate burrow. What he found was architecture. 10 feet in diameter, 80 square feet of floor space, 7-foot ceiling, whitewashed walls smooth as plaster, packed clay floor level and hard, a bed platform raised 6 inches on stone supports, a desk made from shipping crates, shelves carved into the limestone, a thermometer mounted on the wall reading 54 degrees. The air was fresh, not stale, not musty. The ventilation system was working. He could feel the gentle current air moving in from one pipe, out through another. No moisture on the walls, no smell of mold, no dampness in the air. He looked up at the circle of sky above framed by the shaft, then around at the chamber. It was warmer down here than it had been on the surface, warmer and completely still. It's a house, Blackwood. He called up. Better built than most in town. Miles Freeman, the county assessor, descended next. He was a bureaucrat, a man who lived and died by regulation and code. He pulled out a measuring tape. checked dimensions, tested the walls, examined the ventilation, took notes. He climbed back up and said 4 words that ended Blackwood's scheme: meets definition of dwelling. Blackwood descended anyway, pride demanding he see for himself. He had to crouch in the shaft, had to climb down a ladder that felt rickety but held his weight. He reached the bottom and straightened in a chamber that shouldn't exist. The technical superiority was undeniable. The walls were solid. The floor was dry. The air was clean. She'd done with $3 in 90 days what most men couldn't do with $100 in a crew. This is a trick, his voice echoed in the dome. Living underground like an animal, Maggie stood in her chamber, arms crossed, expression neutral. Law doesn't specify direction. This won't burn in a fire, won't blow in a cyclone, won't freeze in a blizzard. Can you say the same for your properties, Mr. Blackwood? Freeman was writing in his official ledger topside. Structure is permanent, habitable, and legally compliant. Deed stands. Blackwood climbed out of the well like he was climbing out of his own grave. His face was red. His hand shook. To Tom Brennan, as they rode back to town, he said it through gritted teeth. That bitch just made me look like a fool. Brennan said nothing. But in his mind, he was remembering the chamber, the dry walls, the steady temperature, the impossible made real. That night, Maggie sat alone in her underground home. One candle, a journal open on her makeshift desk. She reviewed her supply inventory with the same methodical attention she'd given to the excavation. Food: 4 months of dried goods, jerky, hardtack, beans, dried apples. Water condensation collection system functional. The temperature differential between the 54-degree chamber and the colder shaft walls would produce moisture. She'd line the shaft with tin sheeting to channel it into a collection barrel. Heat none needed. The earth provided. 54 degrees, summer and winter. Constant. She wrote in the margin of her father's ledger, November 15th, 1885. Structure validated. Blackwood defeated. Next phase, deep winter preparation. Outside above ground, she couldn't see the sky changing. Couldn't see the high cirrus clouds streaking in from the northwest. Couldn't see the barometric pressure beginning its sharp sudden fall. At the saloon in Copper Ridge, old Tim Murphy was telling anyone who'd listen. Cattle's acting wrong, huddling tight. Birds left 3 days ago all at once. Big storm coming, bigger than 71. Doc Harrison bought another round and tried not to think about how many people in this town lived in houses that were little more than pine boards and hope. The journalist in 1926 leaned back in his chair. So she beat Blackwood, Cartwright nodded. She beat the law, beat the county, beat every man who said it couldn't be done. He paused. But the real test was 3 weeks away. And when it came like the wrath of God. Late November brought the signs that old men recognized and young men ignored. Doc Harrison saw it first in his patients. Anxiety without cause, headaches from pressure changes, women reporting their joints aching in patterns that preceded weather, not illness. He walked the streets of Copper Ridge and watched the sky. High cirrus clouds, thin as spider silk, streaking from the northwest. Barometric pressure falling. Not gradually, sharply. 0.8 inches in 4 hours, according to the gauge in his office. At the livery stable, horses refused their feed. In the pastures beyond town, cattle clustered so tight they looked like a single organism. And the birds had gone. All of them. Overnight, the cottonwoods and aspens stood silent, branches empty. Harrison found Cartwright at the sheriff's office, reviewing supply inventories. "How much firewood does the average family have stored?" Harrison asked. Cartwright looked up from his ledger. "Most have 2 cords, maybe 3 if they planned ahead. It won't be enough. Doc, we get through every winter." "Not winters like this one," Harrison pointed at the sky. "I've seen this pattern once before. 1871. Great blizzard. Killed 200 people across the territory." Cartwright stood and walked to the window. The sky was the color of a fresh bruise. Purple-gray. Heavy. Wrong. "What do we do? Pray. And hope that Thorne woman knows what she's built." Tom Brennan stood outside Blackwood's office, watching his employer pace. The older man's face was red, his movements jerky with barely contained rage. The legal defeat still festered like an infected wound. The bank sent another letter, Blackwood said. $2,000 by February, or they seize everything. Brennan said nothing. He'd learned that silence was safer than speech around Silas Blackwood. I need that land, hers and 4 others. Package deal to the railroad, but she... Blackwood slammed his fist on the desk. She built a goddamn hole and called it a house. Sir, about the weather. I don't care about the weather, Blackwood spun. Watch that property. When she freezes, when that idiotic pit becomes her tomb, I want to know immediately. We buy from her estate for pennies. Brennan left the office and rode north. But he didn't ride to watch Maggie Thorne die. He rode because part of him, the part that remembered the dry walls and the steady temperature and the impossible made real, wanted to see if she'd survive what was coming. December 1st. The small storm hit at dawn. Temperature dropped to 15 degrees. Snow fell thick and fast, accumulating 6 inches in 3 hours. In town, families woke to cold houses and lit their stoves early, burning through wood that would be needed later. Brennan rode past the Thorne property at noon. He expected to see smoke. Every dwelling in Montana Territory produced smoke in winter. Stoves, fireplaces. Heat meant combustion, and combustion meant smoke. The Thorne property showed none. The 2 iron pipes stuck up through fresh snow, but no vapor rose from them. No smoke, no steam, nothing. She's dead, Brennan thought. Frozen already. He rode closer, dismounted, approached the hatch location, now buried under snow. He knelt and brushed the powder away, revealing the iron surface. Put his bare hand on the metal. It was warm, not hot, not cold, warm. Body temperature warm. He jerked his hand back like he'd touched something supernatural. From below 30 feet down came the faint sound of movement. Alive. She was alive down there, with no fire. Brennan returned to town and reported to Blackwood, who refused to believe it. Impossible. No one survives winter without fire. I touched the hatch, sir. It was warm. Then she has a fire and the smoke is venting somewhere you didn't see. But Brennan had circled the entire property. There was nowhere for smoke to hide. That night in her chamber, Maggie sat at her desk with a book open and a single candle burning. The thermometer read 53 degrees. Outside, the temperature had dropped to 10. Her chamber was 43 degrees warmer than the surface, and she'd burned nothing but a candle stub the size of her thumb. She wrote in her journal December 1st, small storm, system functional, temperature stable, town will struggle. I will not. No emotion, no satisfaction, just observation. December 10th. The sky changed. Cartwright was walking to the general store when the pressure drop hit him like a physical blow. His ears popped. His vision swam. He grabbed a hitching post for balance. Around him, other people stopped mid-stride, hands going to their heads. Dogs began howling. Horses in their stalls kicked at the walls. The temperature was falling. He could feel it. 65 degrees at dawn. By noon, 40. By 2 o'clock, 25 and dropping fast. Wind picking up, 40 miles per hour. Then 60. By 4 o'clock, the sky was the color of gangrene. Purple-black, low, heavy. The wind was screaming now, and the first snow began to fall. Not gentle flakes, crystalline needles, frozen and sharp, moving horizontal, driven by wind that was approaching 70 miles per hour. Cartwright ran for the church. Stone construction, basement, best shelter in town. Get everyone inside, he shouted to Deputy Marshal Hayes. Everyone now. By 6 o'clock, 40 people were crammed into the church basement. Temperature outside had reached minus 38 degrees. Wind sustained at 70 miles per hour with gusts to 90. Visibility was zero. The world had become a white screaming void. 2 stoves burned at maximum, fed with cordwood that was disappearing faster than Cartwright liked. The room temperature held at 28 degrees, cold enough to see breath, cold enough that the children were turning pale. Doc Harrison moved among them, checking extremities, looking for the early signs of frostbite. He pulled Cartwright aside. At this rate, we have firewood for maybe 18 hours. If the storm lasts longer than that, he didn't finish, didn't need to. Across town, Silas Blackwood huddled in the basement of his collapsed office building. The roof had come down at 7 o'clock, 2 tons of snow and timber crashing through the second floor. He and Brennan had made it to the basement seconds before the collapse. Now they sat in near darkness, burning desk furniture in a makeshift brazier. The temperature in the basement was 12 degrees. Blackwood's hands were already showing white patches. Frostbite. How long can we last? Blackwood's voice shook. Brennan looked at the pile of broken chairs and desk drawers. Maybe 12 hours of fuel. Then what? Brennan thought of the warm hatch, the chamber 30 feet down, the woman who'd built a house in the Earth's temperature instead of fighting the air's temperature. Then we freeze, sir. In her chamber, Maggie sat reading her father's ledger. The thermometer read 54 degrees. The candle burned steady. From above, transmitted through 30 feet of limestone and clay, came a faint rhythmic thrumming. The storm, filtered, distant, like hearing thunder from inside a cave. She turned the page and continued reading about ventilation coefficients and thermal mass. Outside, the world was ending. Down here, it was Tuesday. December 11th, day 2. The storm intensified. Surface temperature minus 42 degrees. Wind gusts to 100 miles per hour. Snow falling so thick it was like being inside a cloud. A frozen, murderous cloud. In the church basement, children were crying. Not from fear, from cold. Their core temperatures were dropping despite the press of bodies in the 2 struggling stoves. The youngest, a 3-year-old girl named Emma Patterson, had stopped shivering. Doc Harrison recognized the sign immediately. Stage 2 hypothermia, the body giving up the fight. He pulled Cartwright into the corner. We have 6 hours, maybe 8, then we start losing the children. Cartwright looked at the 40 faces, families, friends, people he'd known his entire life. The woodpile was down to a few hours' worth. The cold was winning. There has to be somewhere, he said. Harrison shook his head. Every building in town is the same. Pine boards, drafts. We're all dying at different speeds. Cartwright's mind raced, and then stopped. On a memory, 2 iron pipes sticking up through the snow, a hatch that was warm to the touch, a woman who'd built something impossible. The Thorne place, Harrison stared. Ben, that's 2 miles in this storm. We'd never make it. We're dead if we stay here. The 2 men looked at each other. The mathematics were brutal. Stay and freeze slowly. Go and maybe freeze quickly, but maybe, just maybe, find warmth. Cartwright stood and addressed the room. I need 3 volunteers. We're going to the Thorne property. Silence. Then Tom Brennan stood. I'll go. Frank Hayes, a miner with wilderness experience, stood next. I know the land. I can navigate. Joseph Chen, whose brother had frozen to death in the first night, stood last. My brother died because he didn't know better. Maybe that woman does. 4 men wrapped themselves in every blanket available, tied themselves together with rope. Cartwright took his compass. Hayes carried a mental map of landmarks that were now buried under 8 feet of drifts. Sarah, Cartwright's wife, grabbed his arm. Ben, you'll die out there. We'll die in here. He kissed her forehead. Trust me. They opened the basement door. The wind hit them like a freight train. Temperature minus 42. Wind chill bringing it down to minus 70. Exposed skin would freeze in 90 seconds. They crawled. Not walked. Crawled. The wind was too strong to stand against. Snow drove into their faces like frozen sand. Breathing hurt. Each inhalation felt like inhaling broken glass. The first mile took 90 minutes. Hayes navigated by the slope of the land by memory, by instinct. The compass was almost useless, his hands too frozen to hold it steady. Halfway, Joseph Chen collapsed. Hypothermia stage 2, sluggish, confused. They tied him to a blanket and dragged him. The added weight was crushing. Brennan's shoulders screamed. Cartwright's legs were going numb. 3/4 mark. Hayes fell into a drift and disappeared, buried 4 feet deep in powder. They dug frantically, hands like claws, finding him by feel. Pulled him out. Lost 15 minutes. Lost precious warmth. At the 2-hour mark, all 4 men were in stage 2 hypothermia, movement sluggish, speech slurred, thoughts fragmenting. We're lost, Brennan mumbled through frozen lips. We're dead. But Cartwright felt something. The ground slope, changing. He recognized it. The rise where the Thorne property sat. Keep moving. They crawled forward, searching blind. The world was white noise and pain, and cold that went beyond cold into something that felt like burning. Cartwright's hand hit iron. A pipe. The exhaust vent. Found it. They followed the pipe to its base, dug through 3 feet of snow, found the hatch. It was frozen shut. Ice had built up around the edges, sealing it like a tomb. Cartwright pounded on the iron with his belt buckle. The metal rang dull, muffled by ice and wind. No response. Hayes collapsed, completely unconscious. Brennan was crying, ice forming in his beard from the tears. "She's dead," he whispered. "We're all dead." But Cartwright kept pounding, mechanical, desperate, rhythm without hope. 30 feet below, Maggie was reading when she noticed it. A vibration, faint, rhythmic, different from the storm's thrumming. Deliberate. She stood, listened. The pattern was too regular to be natural. Someone was above. She grabbed her iron pry bar and climbed the ladder. At the top, she could hear it clearly now. Metal on metal, pounding, frantic. Ice had sealed the hatch from the outside. Condensation from her warm breath meeting -42-degree the metal. She chipped at it from the inside. 10 minutes of work. Muscles straining, ice falling in chunks. She threw the 4 bolts, heaved upward. The hatch opened like the mouth of another world. -42-degree air blasted down. Snow poured in, and collapsed in the opening were 4 shapes that barely looked human. Maggie saw Cartwright's badge first, ice-covered, dull. She didn't hesitate. Grabbed his coat with both hands and hauled. 130 pounds of woman pulling 190 pounds of frozen man. "Get them down the ladder," she commanded. "Now." Cartwright could barely form words. "Can't. Frozen. Move or die. Your choice." The authority in her voice cut through his hypothermia fog. He moved. Hayes was unconscious. Maggie grabbed him by the belt and collar and dragged him to the ladder opening. Pushed him over the edge. He fell, hit the ladder rungs, tumbled the last 15 feet to the chamber floor. She did the same with Chen. With Brennan. Bodies falling into warmth. Cartwright descended last on legs that wouldn't bend properly. Maggie came down behind him and sealed the hatch. The storm vanished. Silence crashed down like a physical presence. 4 men lay on the packed clay floor. The transition from -42 to 54 degrees was a 96-degree change. Their bodies went into shock. Frozen clothes began to steam. The chamber filled with the smell of wet wool and sweat and fear. As blood rushed back into oxygen-starved extremities, the pain was extraordinary. Like being stabbed with hot knives. Hayes vomited. Chen remained unconscious, pulse 40 beats per minute. Brennan was crying, gasping, his face a mask of ice and tears. Cartwright lay on his back chest, heaving, unable to speak. Maggie moved with clinical efficiency. She stripped their frozen outer layers carefully. Skin could tear when frozen. Wrapped Chen in her only blanket. Gave the others lukewarm water from her collection barrel. Not hot. Hot water on a hypothermic body could stop the heart. She rubbed their extremities gently, restoring circulation, checking for blackened skin that meant tissue death. "Don't warm too fast," she said. "Can stop the heart." It took 30 minutes for Cartwright to recover speech. He lay there, feeling returning to his body in waves of agony and relief, looking around the chamber. No fire, no stove, just whitewashed walls and a single candle, and air that was fresh and breathable and warm, impossibly warm. "How?" His voice was a croak. "How is this possible?" Maggie sat on her desk, arms crossed. "You're 30 feet below frost line. Earth here is 55 degrees. Summer or winter. Took 3 million tons of dirt to reach this temperature. I'm just borrowing it." Brennan, teeth chattering, forced out words. "But the ground surface, it's frozen solid. Frost penetrates 5 feet, then stops. Below that ground holds average yearly temperature." She pointed at the walls. "Montana's average is 55. Sun bakes the surface all summer. That heat soaks down slow. Takes 4 months to reach this depth. By winter, summer's warmth finally arrives down here." She showed them the ventilation pipes, explained the system, without condescension, without superiority. Just facts. Air comes in through 30 feet of buried pipe. Ground warms it to 55 before it reaches us. Wind across the exhaust pipe creates low pressure pulls stale air out. No fan, no fuel, just atmospheric pressure and dirt. Frank Hayes, the miner, had enough engineering background to understand. You built a geothermal heat exchanger. I built a house in the planet's temperature, not the air's temperature. The men lay there in the 54-degree silence while above them the storm raged at -42. The contrast was so extreme it felt like theology, like they'd died and gone to some strange underground heaven. Cartwright looked at Maggie, really looked at her. Not a widow, not a desperate woman, an engineer who'd done the math while everyone else had relied on tradition. She'd been right, they'd all been wrong. And now crammed into 80 square feet with a woman they'd mocked as the Badger Widow, they understood the difference between surviving and knowing how to survive. Outside, the Great Blizzard of 1885 entered its third day. 14 people across Copper Ridge were already dead. More would die before it ended. But in a chamber 30 feet below the screaming wind, 5 people sat in shirt-sleeve warmth and breathed air that tasted of limestone and vindication. Day 4 underground. The thermometer still read 54 degrees, but the chamber felt smaller. 5 people in 80 square feet. The mathematics of human space. Maggie sat at her desk doing calculations by candlelight. Food plan for 1 person, 4 months. Now 5 people. Division was simple and brutal. 4 months became 24 days. The storm showed no signs of breaking. She cut rations. 6 ounces of jerky per person, 4 ounces of hardtack. Water from the condensation barrel, which was producing less than she'd calculated. 5 people breathing created more moisture but also consumed more. Joseph Chen lay on the bed platform still recovering. His core temperature had stabilized, but he remained weak. The others sat on the floor in shifts sleeping when exhaustion overtook discomfort. No one complained. Survival had a way of making men practical. Frank Hayes was pacing. 3 steps turn, 3 steps turn. The repetitive motion of a mind trying to escape a body that had nowhere to go. His breathing was getting faster, shallower. Maggie watched him. "Sit down, Mr. Hayes." "I can't. I need air, space. Air is constant. Space is what it is. Panic doesn't change mathematics." Hayes stopped, looked at her. "How can you be so calm?" "Because calm is cheaper than panic. Panic burns calories we don't have." The bluntness was like cold water. Hayes sat. Tom Brennan had been silent for hours. Now he spoke, voice quiet. "Why did you let us in?" Maggie didn't look up from her supply inventory. "You needed heat. I had heat. Simple. We mocked you. Blackwood tried to destroy you. I kicked your stones into the pit." Now she looked at him. "I know." "Then why? Math doesn't care about feelings. You were dying. I could prevent it." The equation was obvious. Cartwright, sitting against the wall, watched this exchange. 40 years later, he would tell the journalist, "That was when I understood her completely. She wasn't merciful. She wasn't vengeful. She was just rational. It was the most terrifying and admirable thing I'd ever seen." Day 5. The psychological weight was increasing. Hayes was fighting claustrophobia. Brennan couldn't stop apologizing. Chen drifted in and out of fevered sleep. Cartwright kept checking his pocket watch as if time mattered differently down here. Only Maggie seemed unchanged. She maintained the candle, checked the ventilation pipes, monitored the thermometer, rationed the food with mechanical precision. "How long?" Brennan asked. "How long can we last?" Maggie did the math in her head. "Storm will break by day 7. Food will last 20 days at current consumption." "How do you know the storm breaks day 7? "I don't, but historical probability suggests blizzards of this magnitude average 6 to 8 days. We're on day 5. And if you're wrong, then we eat less and last longer." The certainty in her voice was either insanity or genius. Cartwright suspected it was both. That night, by candle stub light, the men asked her to explain the design. She pulled out her father's ledger, showed them the calculations, the geothermal gradients, the frost line penetration tables, the Venturi effect diagrams. Hayes, who'd worked in mine engineering, studied the numbers with growing awe. "This is publishable. This could save thousands of lives. It's not complicated. Anyone with a shovel and time could do it. But no one thought to." Maggie closed the ledger. Most people build what they see others building. My father taught me to build what physics requires. Day 6, Joseph Chen opened his eyes and spoke his first coherent words in 3 days. Where am I? 30 feet underground, Maggie said. You're safe. Chen looked around the chamber, saw the whitewashed walls, the steady candle. The other men, understanding slowly dawned. You saved us. Physics saved you. I just knew the physics. Chen sat up slowly. His hands were bandaged. Frostbite damage, but not severe. He'd keep his fingers. My brother died in his house. The fire went out. If he'd known about this. Cartwright put a hand on Chen's shoulder. A lot of people died who didn't know. That's why we're here. To survive. To learn. The storms thrumming through the earth had become a constant backdrop. White noise, almost comforting in its regularity. So when it stopped, the silence was shocking. Day 7. Morning. Maggie sat up from her half-sleep, instantly alert. The rhythmic vibration through the limestone had ceased. The earth was still. It's over. Hayes stirred. How do you know? Listen. They listened. Absolute silence. No thrumming, no distant roar filtering through 30 feet of rock and clay. Cartwright stood, joints creaking. We can leave. In a few hours. Temperature needs to rise above 0. Right now, it's probably still -20 up there. She climbed the ladder and cracked the hatch. A sliver of light, crystalline, painful after days in candlelit dimness. Wind 0, sky blue, blinding blue. The world had stopped trying to kill them. 6 hours later, when the surface temperature had climbed to -10 degrees, 5 figures emerged from the earth. They looked like creatures from a grave, clothes stiff with dried sweat and dirt, beards frozen, eyes squinting against snow glare. The landscape was unrecognizable. Drifts 8 feet high, sculpted into frozen waves by the wind. Trees stripped bare. The trail to town buried under geometry that had nothing to do with the land they'd known. They roped themselves together and began the walk back to Copper Ridge. It took 8 hours to cover 2 miles. The snow was deep and unstable. Haze broke through drifts up to his chest. Chen had to be helped over the larger formations, but they moved steadily and the temperature, while brutal, was survivable without wind. They saw the smoke first, black columns rising from Copper Ridge. Not chimney smoke, structure fire smoke. Then they topped the final ridge and saw the devastation. 31 buildings had collapsed. The church still stood, but 3 houses nearby were flattened. The general store's roof had caved in. Blackwood's office was a pile of timber and twisted metal. Bodies lay in the street, frozen where they'd fallen. A woman clutching a child. An old man face down in a drift. The Patterson family, all 5 of them, found in their beds like sleeping sculptures. The final count would be 14 dead. 12% of the population. Gone. The survivors who'd made it through in the church basement emerged looking like ghosts. Hollow-eyed, fingers and toes blackened with frostbite. Doc Harrison was amputating old Mrs. Fletcher's left foot on a table in the church using whiskey as anesthetic. When Cartwright walked into the church, still roped to the other 4 people, stared like he'd returned from the dead. Sarah Cartwright ran to him, collapsed against his chest. We thought, everyone thought. The Thorn woman, Cartwright said loud enough for everyone to hear. She saved us, her underground house, warm as summer down there. The room went silent. Then someone laughed, bitter, disbelieving. But Brennan stepped forward. He's telling the truth. 54 degrees, no fire, just the earth. Frank Hayes nodded. I'm an engineer. I saw the design, its sound, it's brilliant. The laughter died. 2 weeks later, Silas Blackwood approached Maggie's property. His right hand was bandaged, 3 fingers amputated, frostbite. His face had the look of a man who'd lost everything which he had. The bank had foreclosed. His properties, destroyed in the storm, were seized for unpaid debts. His reputation, built on aggressive land speculation, was ruined. People had died in his poorly constructed rental buildings, while he'd huddled in a basement, burning furniture to stay alive. He stood at the edge of her property hat in his remaining hand. Maggie emerged from her hatch, saw him, waited. Mrs. Thorne, his voice was different, smaller. I was wrong. She said nothing. The bank took everything. My buildings are gone. My investments are worthless. He paused. But people are afraid to rebuild. They see wood as a death trap now. They want what you built. I'm not for hire, Mr. Blackwood. I'm not asking you to work for me. I'm asking you to teach. The town, anyone who wants to learn. He gestured at the ruins of Copper Ridge. I'll donate my foreclosed land for a school building. You'd have full control. Name your price. Maggie looked at him for a long moment. This man who'd tried to steal her land, who'd sent Brennan to sabotage her work, who'd bet on her dad and lost everything when she survived. No, Blackwood blinked. No. I won't build for you, Mr. Blackwood. I'll teach the town to build for themselves. But you don't get to profit from it. You don't get to control it. You tried to take my land. I won't give you my knowledge. She turned and walked back to her hatch. Blackwood stood there, bandaged hand trembling, watching her disappear underground. He'd lost. Completely. Not just the land, not just the money, the moral high ground, the future itself. 3 days later, Sheriff Cartwright called a town meeting in the one structure still fully intact, the stone church. 80 survivors gathered, faces marked by frostbite, grief, fear of the next winter. Cartwright stood at the pulpit. We rebuild above ground, more will demai. We need a new way. Murmurs, agreement, but also uncertainty. Mrs. Thorne has agreed to teach underground construction, free instruction, open to anyone willing to work and learn. A man in the back stood. Underground like animals. Frank Hayes stood. Like engineers, I've seen her design. It's more sophisticated than anything we've built above ground, and it works. We're alive because of it. The vote was unanimous. Maggie's terms were simple. No tuition, classes open to men and women, which caused controversy, until Doc Harrison pointed out that women would be living in these structures too, so they had better know how to maintain them. Basic math skills required, willingness to work essential. 22 students enrolled in the first class, including Tom Brennan. He approached her on the first day nervous. I was wrong about you, about everything. Maggie looked at him. You were young and stupid. Now you're just young. We can fix young. Brennan became her best student, natural aptitude for spatial reasoning, quick with calculations. Within 2 years, he designed his own variation hybrid above and below ground construction. By 1890, Brennan Construction was the largest building firm in Montana Territory. Spring 1886. The snow melted to reveal the full scope of destruction. 43 families were homeless. The town looked like a war zone. But on the ridge above Copper Ridge, construction began. Not of houses, of holes. Maggie stood at 15 different work sites directing excavation. Her students dug with the methodical rhythm she taught them. Strike, fill, haul, dump. The mathematics of earth removal. She taught in the dirt. No classroom, no textbooks. Hands on every lesson. Week 1 frost line, calculations, geothermal principles. She made them measure soil temperature at different depths. Record the data. Understand that the earth had memory. Week 2 ventilation design. They built scale models with hollow reeds and clay. Tested airflow. Learned that wind could be a tool, not just an enemy. Week 3 dry stack masonry. Each student built a section of wall. Failed, rebuilt, failed again. Learned through failure. Week 4 waterproofing and drainage. The critical knowledge that separated a shelter from a tomb. Maggie's teaching method was brutal and effective. I show once, you do it, you fail, you learn. By July, the ridge was transformed. Gentle mounds dotted the landscape. Iron pipes protruded at angles like the breathing tubes of buried machines. From a distance, Copper Ridge looked like a prairie dog colony. Up close, it was a sophisticated underground neighborhood. 15 families lived fully underground. 20 chose hybrid designs. 5 stubborn traditionalists rebuilt above ground and were mocked as skyfools. The economics shifted. Lumber demand dropped 70%. Iron pipe orders surged. Property values climbed. Safe housing commanded a premium. Maggie became the town's unofficial chief engineer. Every major construction project required her consultation. She was respected, though not loved. Too blunt for affection, too cold for friendship. but competent, undeniably, absolutely competent. She didn't care about popularity, only about structures that would keep people alive. 5 years passed, 1891. Copper Ridge had 200 residents. 60% lived underground or in hybrid structures. Maggie's school had trained over 300 students across Montana Territory. She still lived in her original chamber, expanded now to 2 rooms. Never remarried. Rumored relationship with Doc Harrison never confirmed. Neither would discuss it. She'd adopted Mary Chen Joseph's orphaned younger sister. The girl was 12 now, learning engineering the way Maggie had learned from her father. Diagrams, calculations, the language of physics. Your brother died in a bad house, Maggie told her. You'll build good ones. Silas Blackwood had left Montana, moved to Helena, worked as a clerk in a fruit office. Broken, bitter, but occasionally in saloons he'd tell his story as a warning. I tried to evict the smartest woman in Montana Territory. Don't be me. The 1930s. Dust Bowl. The Great Plains became a desert of choking silt and furnace heat. Surface temperatures reached 115 degrees. Dust storms buried entire towns. But Copper Ridge, now called New Copper Ridge, remained habitable. The underground homes stayed at 55 degrees while the surface baked. Dust storms raged above, but the inhabitants simply closed their hatches and waited. Survival rate: 95% of underground structures remained functional. 60% of surface homes were abandoned. National media descended. Photographers, journalists, engineers from universities. The Montana Underground Miracle became a case study in passive geothermal design. Maggie Thorne's method, now called the Thorne Vault System, spread to Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska. Thousands of families survived the Dust Bowl in underground homes based on her 1885 design. She died in 1920, aged 63. Pneumonia caught above ground during a supply run. The irony was not lost on anyone. Survived the Great Freeze underground, killed by ordinary illness on the surface. Montana, 1926. Sheriff Cartwright, 82, finished his story. The journalist's hand was cramped from writing. What happened to her chamber? The original well. Cartwright stood, slowly walked to a shelf and pulled down a leather-bound ledger. Water-stained, spine cracked. She willed this to me, her father's journal. This is what saved us. He opened it. Pages of diagrams, calculations in precise handwriting. The accumulated knowledge of a railroad engineer passed to his daughter used to defeat winter itself. Was she happy? The journalist asked. Cartwright considered. Happy? Wrong question. She was satisfied. She solved a problem, saved lives, built a legacy. That was enough. He looked out the window at the Montana landscape. Most people fight nature. She joined it. And she won. 1985, 100 years after the Great Freeze. Copper Ridge Historical Museum opened, the centerpiece of full-scale reconstruction of the Thorne Chamber. Visitors descended a wooden ladder into earth-cool darkness, felt the 55-degree constant themselves, saw the whitewashed walls, the ventilation pipe demonstration, the thermometer still reading 54 degrees after a century. Exhibit text: Margaret Maggie Thorne, pioneer of geothermal architecture, survived the Great Blizzard of 1885 by building with the earth, not against it. Her design saved over 800 lives across 50 years. Proves survival is mathematics, not luck. The original well was preserved as a historical landmark. Archaeologists had excavated it carefully. The dry stack walls were still intact, perfectly plumb. The iron hatch rusted but functional. The ventilation pipes still standing after a century. 2015. Modern geothermal engineers visited the site with instruments that would have seemed like magic to Maggie Thorne. They analyzed her design with thermal cameras, airflow meters, humidity sensors. The findings were published in the Journal of Sustainable Architecture. Design efficiency: 85%, as effective as modern geothermal systems. Built with 1885 technology. Total cost $3 in scavenged materials. Modern equivalent $15,000 minimum. The lead engineer, a woman from MIT, stood in the reconstructed chamber and spoke to the documentary film crew. She understood principles we didn't formalize until the 1950s. Thermal mass, passive ventilation, earth coupling. She didn't have the terminology, but she had the mathematics. And that was enough. The PBS documentary, The Woman Who Lived Underground, reached 4 million viewers, sparked renewed interest in passive geothermal design. Architecture students studied the Thorn Vault. Engineers referenced it in papers on sustainable housing. The final scene of the documentary showed the preserved chamber, camera descending the ladder into cool darkness, panning across whitewashed walls unmarked by time. The thermometer still mounted, still reading 55 degrees. A bronze plaque on the wall installed by the Historical Society. While the wind owns the sky, the wise own the ground beneath it. M. Thorn, 1885. The screen faded to black. Not to emptiness. To the darkness of Earth, 30 feet down where temperature is constant, and survival is a matter of understanding the planet you live on. Maggie Thorne had built a house that outlasted empires, not through strength, through knowledge. The quiet, unstoppable force of a woman who read her father's ledger and believed in physics more than tradition. The well that wouldn't freeze became a monument, not to suffering overcome, but to intelligence applied, to the simple revolutionary idea that you don't fight nature. You join it. You build where it's already warm. You breathe air the earth has already heated. You let 3 million tons of dirt do the work that men thought required fire. And when the storm comes, when the world above becomes lethal and impossible, you close the hatch and sit in the planet's memory of summer and wait for winter to remember it's just weather, and weather always ends, but good engineering lasts forever.